The wind had begun to shift over the highway bend, not harsh, just enough to carry the dry breath of sagebrush and the distant rattle of a loose sign swaying over an empty gas station. A rusted pickup rolled to a stop on the shoulder just past mile marker 214, its brake lights pulsing briefly before vanishing altogether. Dust curled around the tires, then drifted out across the road like a veil unraveling. A door creaked open, then silence. The man stepped out slowly, mid-50s, weather-scored face, shoulders pulled tight, as if every bone had been bracing for this moment longer than he cared to admit. His clothes were plain, road dirty. Someone who'd long since stopped caring how others saw him. He kept glancing at the horizon like it owed him an answer, but it didn't give one. Behind him, the dog waited. It was a German shepherd, older, grizzled around the muzzle, with a broad chest and the kind of deep-set eyes that made people think twice about looking too long. Not quite young, not quite old, but with that alert stillness dogs get when they sense something wrong in the tone of your voice, even if the words say nothing. The man opened the tailgate. He didn't speak, didn't pat the dog goodbye, or even look directly at it. He just stood still for a beat too long, like he'd rehearsed this, and now didn't know how to deliver the lines. Then, with a curt motion, he gestured. "Go on," he muttered, barely audible under the low hum of a passing semi-truck, but the dog didn't move. The man's jaw twitched. Get go. Still nothing. He reached for a crumpled fast food bag on the seat and tossed it into the grass, a half-eaten burger tumbling out, wrapper still clinging to it. The dog looked at the food, then looked back at him, not with accusation. Not even confusion, just ... stillness, the kind that says it knows. From the ridge above, a red-tailed hawk circled once, its shadow gliding over the pavement like an omen. Cars continued in both directions, unaware. Then a woman driving a silver sedan glanced over and saw the man shove the dog with his boot, just enough to force it down off the tailgate. The animal landed awkwardly, one leg buckling. The woman's mouth opened, but the moment was already gone. The man climbed back into the truck and started the engine. The dog stood, slowly, one paw lifted, then another. A hesitant step toward the road, not the food. The woman's car had passed, but she looked again in the rearview mirror, blinking rapidly. The red lights of the truck flared as it accelerated too fast for gravel. The dog began to trot, then run. The pickup curved into the main lane, tires squealing faintly, and behind it just for a few seconds the dog kept pace, not closing the distance, not falling behind, just matching it breathlessly, tail low, legs pounding with all the urgency of memory. Other drivers began to slow. What were they seeing? A stray, a chase, a dog desperate not to be left behind. One man honked, another rolled down his window, shouting something lost to the wind. The truck didn't stop. The shepherd veered toward the embankment, gravel flying behind him. Then, without warning, the animal cut in front of a white SUV. Tires shrieked. A chorus of horns flared, and then silence. The shepherd stood in the center of the highway, not hit, not hurt, just still. The pickup was gone now, disappearing into the orange haze where the sun touched asphalt. For a long second, no one moved. The traffic parted slowly, uncertainly, as if the dog had become something more than an obstacle, a figure, a witness. The animal's chest heaved, dust clung to its fur. It turned its head toward the distant place the truck had gone, and didn't look away. Nobody could say why it hadn't chased further, why it had chosen that moment, that spot, to stop. But every driver who passed remembered the stillness. The animal stood like that for another full minute before finally lowering its head and walking off the road, not toward the burger in the grass, but toward the trees. And as it vanished into the tree line, the wind picked up again, colder now, the kind that made the leaves rustle with something almost like warning. This wasn't over, not yet. The dog moved with purpose now, not hurried, not panicked, but steady, as if some ancient compass inside its chest had shifted, slightly, pointing not toward the man who'd left, but toward something older than the road itself. The trees ahead, sparse and wind-worn, stood like forgotten sentinels beside the highway. Dry leaves scraped across the roots like whispers. The dog stepped across the threshold from asphalt to earth without hesitation. Behind him, the world of humans resumed its noise. Horns, tires, the irritated sigh of commuters, all fading. No one followed. In the quiet of the trees, the light thinned, not dark yet, but leaning that way. The air cooled as shadows lengthened, drawing lines across the forest floor. The shepherd paused once, ears swiveling, nostrils flaring. Something was moving, not near, but not far either. He lowered his head and sniffed the trail. Not prey, not danger, just ... memory. The scent of old motor oil, tobacco, dried beef wrappers, and hands that used to scratch the space behind his ear on cold mornings. But the scent wasn't fresh, not anymore. He didn't call out, didn't bark, just pressed forward, muscles tight with something between duty and defiance. Half a mile in, the trees opened into a shallow clearing, overgrown grass, a dry creek bed twisted with roots and shattered cans. At the far edge stood a burned-out trailer half swallowed by weeds. The shepherd stopped and looked straight at it. A rusted folding chair leaned beside the door, bent and missing a leg. Wind tapped its edge against the siding, soft, rhythmic. Holloway stepped closer to someone passing by. It would have looked like a stray sniffing for food. But this wasn't scavenging. This was a pattern, familiar, practiced. He circled once, then stood still near the doorway, head cocked slightly, waiting. Inside, there was no movement, just the stale smell of rotten metal. He sat. 10 minutes passed, then 20. And still, he waited. Farther down the highway, the man had pulled into a roadside motel, one of those places where curtains stay permanently drawn and the vending machine hums like it's the only thing alive. He didn't check in right away, just sat in the truck, eyes on the rearview mirror. Not looking for traffic, just looking. The glove compartment was still slightly ajar. A collar rested there, worn leather, tag missing. He closed it with back of his hand, then ran his palm over his mouth. For a long time he didn't move. Eventually he went inside. Back in the clearing, the shepherd rose, not abruptly, with the slow, resigned grace of something that had waited before and learned not to expect. He turned, not toward the highway but deeper into the trees, past the trailer, toward the edge of a ravine where a broken fence slouched under the weight of years. On the other side, scrub brush and faint trails, and beyond that, nothing paved. He followed it. A thin path curved along the hillside, dusty and half-erased. Coyotes scat nearby, rabbit prints, but the shepherd didn't care. His steps were more confident now, as though something had resolved in him, though the reason remained invisible to all but him. Half an hour later, he stopped again. A pair of headlights glimmered weakly through the branches below. Not moving, parked an old sedan, engine off, windows open. From this distance it looked abandoned. But a faint cough cut through the silence. Human, weak. The shepherd waited, barely breathing, then movement. A boy's arm reached out from the passenger side, trembling as it searched for something on the gravel. His voice was hoarse, unintelligible, but the tone was familiar, not calling to anyone, just calling out. The shepherd tilted his head again, ears twitching. He made no sound, but he stepped forward. From the sedan came another cough and then a sudden thump, the boy collapsing halfway out the door, his breath catching against the dust. The shepherd descended the slope in 3 sharp bursts, paws barely making a sound. He reached the boy, and stopped just short of touching. He sniffed. Not the scent he'd come for, not the man, but familiar, in another way. Hospital soap, sweat, fear. And something else. Faint, metallic. The boy groaned. His eyes opened just enough to register the dog's shape, and didn't flinch. They looked at each other for a long, silent beat. Then the boy reached out, not fast, not desperate. Just a hand, open and unsure. The shepherd didn't move, but his tail gave a single, slow wag. A breeze moved through the dry leaves behind them. The dog turned once to glance toward the trees, as if checking for something no one else could see. Then he stepped forward and laid his head gently beneath the boy's hand. From far down the valley, a low rumble echoed distant thunder, or maybe just the warning growl of a coming truck. Either way, something had shifted, and in that moment, it was no longer clear who had found whom. The trees swallowed him whole. The world behind horns, engines, the smear of rubber on asphalt, faded like an old radio turned down to low, to matter. In front, nothing moved but the tall grass trembling in the wind, the dry leaves shifting like restless thoughts. The German shepherd didn't look back. A low branch brushed his spine. He paused only to lift his paw from a thistle, then pressed deeper. There was no path here, just instinct and a faint, old memory of softer footsteps, of the way things used to smell before the truck, before the silence. A trail of scent perhaps only he could sense, etched not in soil but in something older, more internal. The forest grew thicker, colder, to the south. Storm clouds pressed low, heavy with the weight of something that hadn't yet broken. Shadows lengthened, and up ahead, the clearing. It wasn't much, a drainage ditch and a fallen fence post, but the dog stopped there, crouched low to sniff the earth, and then he lay down. Just like that. His body curled in a familiar gesture, but the stillness wasn't rest. It was memory, waiting, the way he used to wait on porches that no longer stood. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. He didn't bark, didn't whine. But when the old man's truck reappeared, distant, just barely visible through a crack in the tree line, reversing awkwardly down the shoulder, the shepherd did not move. Not at first. Inside the cab, the man sat motionless, one hand gripping the wheel, the other hanging uselessly by his knee. The wind had changed direction again, now carrying the smell of burnt oil and wet bark, maybe something else too. He hadn't expected the dog to follow. Not like that, not into traffic, not past the place he'd left the food, and certainly not this far, as if it knew not just where to go, but how to wait without demand. The man cursed under his breath, not at the dog, at himself. He opened the door, boots crunching gravel, and stood beside the truck. A long time passed before he stepped closer to the tree line. The shepherd lifted his head but didn't rise. "I thought it'd be easier this way," the man muttered, mostly to the air. "Thought maybe you'd take the hint." Still no response, just the sound of leaves shifting. Distant thunder rolled, not close enough to threaten but enough to say time was passing. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a battered collar. It was frayed around the edges, the tag long since worn blank. He turned it over once, in his hand, then knelt. "You weren't even mine to begin with. You know that." A bird rustled in the canopy above, somewhere far behind. A semi's horn howled, but here in the forest it felt like another world. "She gave you to me when she got sick. Said you'd know when it was time." He stared down at the collar, then slowly at the dog. "But maybe I'm the one who didn't." The shepherd stood now, not tense, not threatening, just present. The man didn't reach out. The storm wind rose, pulling dead leaves through the clearing in little spirals. The dog blinked against the gust, eyes narrowing. Something behind that look, not blame, not quite trust either, but memory, shared memory. He didn't come forward, and the man didn't call him. Instead, he stood, hesitated, then laid the collar gently on the grass between them. "I can't fix the years I wasted," he said quietly. "But if you want to come back, the door's open." Then he turned, walked back to the truck, and left the passenger door wide, and sat. The dog remained where he was. Wind rustled the collar. A distant crack of thunder echoed again, closer now. A few scattered drops tapped the roof of the cab. Still, the dog did not move, but his ears tilted, listening. Not to the man, not to the storm, to something older, something just beginning. The forest swallowed the dog in stages, first his outline, then his limbs, until only the tip of his tail was visible, brushing once against the tall grass before vanishing completely. The cars behind began to move again, but slower, their momentum dulled by something they couldn't quite name. A few drivers turned to look at each other through glass, uncertain whether they'd witnessed a strange accident or something closer to abandonment in its rawest form. No one honked, no one laughed. Done inside the trees, the shepherd walked with no clear destination, only distance. His gait was uneven now, the front right paw carrying the memory of the earliest stumble, but not enough to stop him. Birds scattered from a low branch above. A squirrel froze along a fallen trunk, watching silently as the dog passed. The air in the woods was cooler, thick with damp earth and needles, the sun filtering through like faded memories every few steps. He paused and looked behind him. Not at the road, not at the food, at the nothing, and still he didn't sit. The place he chose to rest wasn't hidden, just far enough to avoid being seen. A slope of earth above a dry creek bed. Roots clung to the bank like twisted fingers, and pine cones crunched underfoot. He laid down slowly, but not entirely. Chest still lifted, ears angled, breath shallow, but alert. Down in the ravine, there was movement, small, erratic, not a predator. A fox kit, barely more than a shadow with legs skittered across the mud. The shepherd watched, unmoving. He did not bark, he did not rise, just followed it with his eyes, as if reminded of something small and fragile once left in his care. Then came the crunch of leaves, not the random fall of branches, or the wind's slow crawl. This was footstep rhythm, human weight, measured, hesitant. He was not alone. The woman who had seen him run, the one in the silver sedan, stood now just beyond the tree line. She hadn't planned to stop, had driven 15 minutes before pulling over, putting her head in her hands, and turning back. Now, shoes muddy and breath uneven, she searched the trees with a kind of strange urgency. Not rescue, not guilt, just need. She spotted him when he shifted slightly, his shoulder catching a sliver of dying light. He didn't run, neither did she. Approached. They watched each other across the narrowing space, unsure of rules. Her voice, when it came, was careful, low and unthreatening, like someone speaking near an open wound. "Hey boy." He didn't move. She crouched slightly, not to call him over, but just to lower herself to the forest's level, a sign of respect in the wild. Her eyes scanned his posture, the rigid front legs, the twitch at the corner of his muzzle, the too-thin outline beneath the fur. This wasn't a dog left behind for the first time. She opened her coat and slowly pulled something out, not food, not rope, but a soft piece of fabric. A child's t-shirt, light blue, folded, small. He noticed. The wind picked up then, just enough to lift the shirt's corner, revealing a smudge of something dark near the hem. It wasn't blood, just old dirt, dried in streaks. But the way her hand trembled as she folded it back again, there was grief there. Not loud, not messy, just worn into the muscle. "I used to bring my daughter here," she murmured, more to the woods than the dog, "before everything changed." Still, he stayed. A branch cracked in the distance. Sharp, purposeful. Both their heads turned at the same time. The sound was too heavy for deer. Not enough rustle for wind. Neither spoke, but something in the air had shifted. The woman rose, slowly, eyes narrowing. Whatever was out there, it wasn't watching them, it was waiting. She looked back at the dog, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. His eyes had shifted to, not to her, but toward the space behind her, as if he knew something she didn't, as if he remembered this rhythm before, the sound of movement in the dark. The choice between trust and silence. His body remained tense, but his tail moved once. A flick, barely a breath, and that's when she understood. He hadn't been abandoned once, he had been left before and come back again and again. The forest quieted suddenly, as though listening for what would happen next. The forest listened. The silence between the woman and the dog stretched like the space between heartbeats, not empty, but full of everything they weren't saying. The sound that had cracked the distance before had faded, folded back into the quiet, as if it had only come to test them, and now it was gone. The shepherd blinked slowly. Not weary now, just tired, a deep, bone-worn kind of fatigue that only settles into animals who have waited too long for something that never came. His chest rose and fell with deliberate calm, but his eyes stayed fixed on the woman, watching not for threat, but for decision. She took one small step forward, no leash, no calling voice, just a quiet breath released into the cooling air. The child's shirt still folded in her palm, trembling. Less now. There was no plan in her mind, no story she could explain, just a feeling she couldn't set down. She didn't understand what had brought her here. Not really. Only that the look in the dog's eyes, steady, wounded, refusing to ask for anything, had met something in her that had long gone unspoken. A crow lifted from a distant branch with a harsh caw, its wings scattering the last light across the tree trunks in ragged flashes. The shepherd didn't flinch. His ears turned to follow, but his body stayed still. Then, quietly, he stood. His back leg trembled slightly at first, then found its balance. He didn't walk toward her, but he didn't walk away. He moved parallel, circling a slow arc through the brush, as if testing the weight of the decision he was about to make. She didn't follow, just lowered herself again, resting the fabric in the crook of an exposed root. She didn't know why. A gesture, maybe, or a signal. The dog paused, near a patch of pine needles where the ground sloped gentle and soft. He sniffed once, lowered his head, and nudged a clump of disturbed soil. Beneath it, barely visible, was a small bundle of decayed cloth and something once plastic. A collar, faded blue, snapped clean in half. The woman covered her mouth, but didn't cry. She didn't need to. Some griefs didn't ask for tears, only recognition. He had brought someone here before. Not the man who had driven away. That much was clear now. The shepherd had returned to this place not out of fear, but memory. This was the place he guarded. Not a home, not a den, a grave. Her voice came again, softer now. You waited, didn't you? The dog didn't move, but the way his shoulders lowered, the way he exhaled through his nose, it was enough. He stepped toward the shirt, gently picked it up in his mouth, and laid it beside the old cloth he'd unearthed. Then he looked back at her, not begging, not questioning, just present. A breeze moved through the trees then, not sharp, not cold. It carried the scent of the earth, the brittle leaves, the faint musk of bark, the kind of wind that feels like an ending, but not quite a farewell. She understood. She rose and stepped closer. This time, he didn't back away. When she reached him, she didn't touch him. She just sat on the ground beside the old grave, hands folded, eyes forward. The dog lay beside her. Minutes passed. The sky above the canopy deepened into a blue that felt almost velvet, the last slant of amber light lingering in the west. A few insects began their evening song. Somewhere far off, a chain of headlights hummed across the highway, oblivious. The woman stood. Eventually, her knees cracked gently. In protest, she looked down at the shepherd, who had not slept, but simply watched, calm now, unguarded. She didn't ask him to follow, but when she turned and began walking, slow and open, he rose. And after one last glance toward the resting place, he followed. They crossed the tree line without a word. The forest closed behind them, not as a final chapter, but as something held. Witnessed. The ground would remember. The wind would return. The grave would stay quiet. The road ahead was dim now. The sun had slipped below the edge of the earth, and the sky carried only a faint afterglow, the color of bruised lavender and smoke. Her car sat waiting on the shoulder, hazard lights ticking gently like a heartbeat to slow. She opened the passenger door. The shepherd hesitated for just a moment, then climbed in, not because he was claimed, but because he had chosen. As she slid into the driver's seat, she looked over once. He was curled in the footwell, eyes half closed but not asleep, just resting, watching the horizon through the windshield, still alert to the world, but not alone in it. And as she turned the key, the engine low and soft, the first star blinked into view above the darkened treetops. A thin breeze moved across the highway, lifting a single pine needle from the back seat and carrying it out the open window into the air. A small thing, but it drifted like a memory finally let go.